Is it? Yeah. We have Deputy Kate O'Connell for Deputy John Deasy and Senator Fintan Warfield for Senator Rose Conway-Walsh. Minutes of our last meeting agreed? Agreed. Correspondence then. Letter from newly formed group which claims to address the issue of non-performing loans. Home options, noted. Pre-budget submission from the Neurological Alliance of Ireland, noted. Draft programme for the Interparliamentary Conference on Stability, Economic Coordination and Governance in the European Union, which will be held in Helsinki on the 30th of September to the 1st of October 2019, noted. Briefing by the Department of Finance in relation to the ECOFIN EU Council Ministers meeting 9th of July, noted. Publications then from the Central Bank, the reprimand of and fine by the Central Bank of Ireland, Wells Fargo Bank International Unlimited Company for regulatory reporting breaches and related governance failings. The calendar of events then for week commencing 8th of July 2019. We have EU newsletters, EU newsletter 4th of July and World Bank newsletter. So we now turn to the main business of the meeting, which is the no consent, no sale bill. So at last Thursday meeting, a first draft of the report of the committee's detailed scrutiny of the bill was circulated, with a request for members to submit written comments by noon yesterday, the 8th of July. On Friday, an amended version containing the views of FLAC and IMHO and certain other changes was also circulated. A further draft which attempts to incorporate the comments of members has now been circulated. So we now have to deal with this matter. I know we have the Minister present with us. So we have substantial amendments to the bill, and we are meeting today just to know, or for members' information. We had invited in the Garda regarding the fraud issue, and they're present outside. So we'll deal with that hopefully at 2 o'clock because our meeting has to end by 3:30. So in dealing with this matter, we may not be able to deal with it completely, but we have to make a start at it because of the amount of information that we now have. So we had invited in the Garda Commissioner because at last week's meeting we presumed that this would be just a signing off on the report, but now it's not, because there is substantial changes and amendments that have been brought forward. So the Garda Commissioner, the Garda Fraud Unit was to come in at 1:30-ish. They're outside and waiting, so I've told them it'll be 2 o'clock or a little after, and we can begin our consideration of what's before us now. But the meeting itself then has to finish at 3:30, 4:15, because this room is booked by another committee. So if we start the proceedings.
Public or private session? Just to,
public. We're in public session now. Deputy McGrath.
The general remark, Chair, and it's just something I want to say. I don't care if it's in public or private session, but I don't think the way that the committee is handling this issue reflects well on itself. I don't believe it's satisfactory, and I don't believe the procedures have been fair. A hard copy of the draft report was circulated on Thursday morning at our meeting. A soft copy of that draft was issued later on Thursday morning. Then on Friday at about 4:15, another email landed in the inbox with a revised draft, which was significantly revised, and a deadline of Monday at noon for amendments to be submitted. I don't believe that is a fair timeline for all of us who rely on staff and the goodwill of others to get our work done. I don't believe the time for amendments was adequate. The report itself looks rushed to me. I've done my best to put in key amendments as I see it, and coming here today, I knew the Deputy Garda Commissioner was lined up to come. I wasn't sure what the sequencing was. Were we going to stick at this until we finished it or not? And I was fearful that the Deputy Garda Commissioner would never be brought in over the course of today's meeting. So I think we should have a general discussion as to where we're going with this in terms of procedurally. We're not going to get very far in 20 minutes, with all due respects to everyone. So we park it then, and what happens at that point?
Well, as you know, Deputy McGrath, I'm in the hands of the members, and the members made all of those decisions last week. If you want to change the decisions that were made, I have no difficulty with that. It's up to the members.
Can I respond to that? To be fair now, I remember when the draft report was circulated on Thursday at the meeting, and Pearse gave some initial feedback about what was missing and so on, and made some fair points, and I tried to tease out how those would be added in, and it seemed to me that there would be an addendum and that we could start preparing amendments to the report as drafted, draft 1. But draft 2 was significantly different, and I certainly had to go back, just park draft 1, start looking at draft 2 and start doing amendments to that.
Yeah, but if you want to do it differently, Deputy McGrath, propose what you want to have done, and then the members can agree or disagree. I don't mind. Deputy Doherty.
Chairperson, yeah, I was just going to come in on that point. First of all, I want to appreciate the work of the Secretariat in relation to ensuring that the witnesses that appeared before this committee were part of the scrutiny report, because it's not our words that make up the scrutiny as such. It is the witnesses that have before us, and we had a first draft that only contained the views of the Department and the Central Bank in the main, without the other parties there. So I first of all welcome the efforts that were put in to ensure that their sentiments, or their core sentiments, were captured in relation to the report. The point you made, Chairperson, is a valid one. There was agreement and unanimity that that's what would happen, and that would be circulated, and we would agree amendments on Monday. I can understand where Deputy McGrath is coming from a certain point of view, but probably I naively, Chairperson, thought that there was, a majority view in this committee that the sale to vultures should not happen without the consent of the borrower. I see very clearly, and let me state this, Deputy McGrath's amendment is about scuttling this bill. That's what it is. Let's call it as it is. It's about scuttling this bill. It's about making sure it isn't going. And if he doesn't support the principle of no consent, no sale, he should just have, he should just say it outright, because the amendment that he has placed before this committee here is about making sure that this bill never sees the light of day. It's a stalling effort, it's a stalling tactic, and that's what it is. And he knows that the clock is ticking in relation to this here, and he also knows, as members of the committee knows, that the banks are lining up for a lot of vulture sales of family homes and all the rest. They're looking at us to act, and I'm very, very disappointed and probably naive when the principles of this bill were supported at second stage by the majority of the Dáil, that I thought that politicians would see that through in relation to allowing it to go to committee stage and having appropriate amendments, if need be, to address any concerns that are raised.
Senator O'Donnell, is it? Oh, sorry. Deputy McGrath? Yeah.
I want to respond to what Deputy Doherty has said, and to reject it out of hand. The very process that we are involved in here is to assess the evidence that we heard and to come to a view on it. The bill passed second stage. Anyone can read the speech I made on behalf of the party, and indeed that others made on that occasion. The whole purpose of having a scrutiny phase is that you listen carefully to the evidence and that you test that evidence. And I believe that, and look, we're getting into the discussion of the amendments themselves at this point, but this isn't any political game as far as we're concerned. It's about getting the right outcome for the country, for mortgage holders, but also for our financial system, and that's why the evidence that has been given has to be tested, and I don't see that anyone proposing the bill should fear their assertions being tested, and being tested in an independent manner, and indeed in a time-bound manner, and that's what we're suggesting. It's not to thwart anything, it's to have the evidence tested given the significance of the issues and potential consequences that have been raised, and that is something that I stand over.
Just on a point, I have no problem with any evidence being tested, but to challenge and to test the bona fides of what Deputy McGrath is saying, what he would allow for is this this bill to go to committee stage with the independent analysis done and concluded before committee stage, that it would allow us to shape our amendments at committee stage. If he so wishes to vote against the bill at that point, so be it. But the reality is, and when you cut through everything, this is a stalling tactic. If you stall this bill for another 3-4 months, then we are going to run out of time to bring this legislation in. So I give the Deputy the opportunity to show his bona fides by allowing this bill to go to committee stage, but not taking committee stage until the independent analysis is done. That would show that the spirit of the bill is being supported, but yet, yes, of course, let's look at further evidence if need be before we deal with the committee amendments and decide at that point whether we want the bill to go to report stage. Otherwise, this is nothing but a stalling tactic and an attempt to scuttle this bill and to stop it in its tracks.
Minister.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I'm unambiguously against this bill. I believe that it will pose the greatest of difficulties for those who are paying mortgages at the moment in terms of what could happen to their mortgages in the future and the rates of interest on their mortgage. And I believe it will, at a time in which our country and our economy needs credit, and families need credit, small companies need credit, our citizens need credit to buy homes. This bill, if passed, could have a very detrimental effect on the ability of new rates of credit to be supplied in our economy at high rates of interest, at affordable rates of interest. And given the number of times at which this committee has acknowledged the need and the role for strong independent regulators, to see the views of the European Central Bank, to see the view of our own central bank, raise a variety of profound concerns in relation to this bill, and perhaps most significantly from a central bank point of view, indicate that if our banking system was ever to get into difficulty, that the passage of this bill could affect the ability of a central bank to support Irish banks at times of difficulty, is the gravest of issues to be raised in relation to any bill like this. It is for all of those reasons that I have been against this bill, and that won't come as any surprise to Deputy Doherty. I want to ensure that people can get treated fairly. I want to ensure that those who are in debt distress get supported. But I also have a duty to people who depend on our banks for credit, who depend on our banks for affordable mortgages. This bill does not recognise that balance. And from a process point of view, Chairman, and I'm eager to get the guidance of you on this regarding how you want to move it forward, I'll simply say that if the government treated any member of the opposition in the way that I believe this committee has been treated by the issue of two different reports that are very different in the space of a single day. If I, as a member of government, attempted to treat this committee like this, the committee would go apoplectic with me, and understandably so. We are not talking about slightly different reports being issued. They are materially different, requiring materially different amendments with very different consequences for what the Dáil could do. And it is for those reasons that I believe this bill should not go forward to committee stage, or at the very least the course of action that has been proposed, which is an independent analysis of the bill before it goes to committee stage, is essential.
Senator O'Donnell.
Just on, and I would have attended the same meeting last Thursday. My understanding was it was an addendum. The report we got on the Friday was significantly different from the report we got on the Thursday. I would have made my views known to the clerk, that I felt that this wasn't proper procedure. We were told amendments were to be in at the same time. I feel the change in the report, the deadline should have reflected that. And I would, apart from, I fundamentally would have a disagreement with what this particular bill proposes, but on the procedural side, I think we required further time. If the report was changed, and when you read through the report, it has been changed quite significantly in various areas within the report, in both on a number of levels, and I feel we weren't given adequate time. Yesterday's 12 noon deadline was grossly inadequate, considering the magnitude of the particular topic we're dealing with. And, I don't believe if we're dealing with something, our role as a committee is to scrutinise something in great depth. If we're doing a report, it requires careful consideration. If a new report issues, it requires significant further careful consideration. We haven't had adequate time.
Right, well then, just to reflect on what has been said by all concerned, you have a sharp memory, all of you, because at the meeting last week, you decided the procedure and the process. You decided that you were going to come back and agree to that you were going to agree to the timing of the amendments. I was asked, and I undertook to talk to the clerk and change the, or add to the report that you already had, and that draft would be sent out. That draft was to reflect the other two sets of witnesses that we had here before us, and that was to be added to what was in the report itself. I changed my opening remarks because I wanted to change them, and other parts of the bill, other parts of the report were added to or new parts inserted. It was up to you then, as members, to take that draft. It's only a second draft, and to decide on the changes that you wanted. You could come back here today and decide, we don't want to do it this week, and we'll postpone it until next week, and that would have been fine. The reason why we're caught in this time issue is because I presumed that we were coming in to look at the amendments, which I didn't expect to be as complex as they are. But now that they are, we don't have the time to deal with it. And it's a matter now, I think, of postponing the consideration of those amendments and of the report itself to another date. Because the amendments are extensive and they do need consideration. But it's in the hands of the members to decide. You decide what you want to do. So if the decision is to postpone this and debate it at another day, it can be tomorrow, it can be after the break, it can be whenever. You make the decision. But to break the deadlock and to facilitate the other witnesses that are coming before us, I suggest that we put the consideration of these amendments and the report back to another day. Apart altogether from what's in the amendment about report or anything else, Deputy Doherty, I think that considering this today in the short time that we have, we're not going to be able to do it. It's as simple as that. And there was no indication the last day that the amendments to the report will be as extensive as they are. So the question is, do you agree to postpone consideration of the report until such time as we have considered every angle and every aspect of that report and the amendments to it? Is that agreed?
I think it's obvious that we don't have the time to deal with the amendments today. That's just obvious. It doesn't take away from the fact that what is happening here at this meeting is a clear attempt. In fairness, Fine Gael have been consistent. Welcome the largest attendance ever from Fine Gael at a finance meeting. It's notable that it's here to protect the vultures instead of ordinary people. But that being there, I welcome all 5 Fine Gael members in their attempt to stop this bill. I've never seen 5 Fine Gael members ever at this committee. We've dealt with issues in terms of trackers, we've dealt in terms of insurance, we've dealt with things like that. But when it comes to the vultures, you all row in to try and sink this bill. But you are consistent. You are consistent in that.
But I'm disappointed. The facts. That's not reflective of the
Sorry,
facts.
Senator.
What I am disappointed and what I am concerned about, because this is an issue of timing, Chair. Now, Deputy McGrath has made a point in terms of independent analysis. That could have happened at any time. And there is a clock ticking on this Parliament. We all know, the public know this. There's also a clock ticking as we have banks rolling up. If this is delayed further and further and further, my view is this should be allowed to go to committee stage. We should be reporting and, yes, carry out the independent analysis and allow that independent analysis to shape our our amendments. I've already made it very clear that this bill is not designed to impact on the issue of securitisation. If that is an issue, and if the independent analysis shows that, and we've heard that from the Senate Bank, it will be dealt with in committee stage. Committee stage is where you allow the spirit of the bill to go ahead and then you fix it. So I'm just concerned about timing. It's up to, obviously, there's an amendment here which I believe will scuttle the bill because of the timing issue, but it is fixable if there is a willingness there to allow this bill to go to committee stage and concurrently have the independent analysis carried out, which is, we've just finished the scrutiny. Like, we spent months on scrutiny and now we're asking for more scrutiny. That's really what we're asking for. But if there's a willingness there to actually support the concept of this here, I think there's a way forward.
Deputy McGrath and then the Minister.
Yeah, I mean, look, if we're to be practical about this, you know, the House is about to go into recess for a 2-month period, and if we agree to nothing today, then nothing will happen, and there won't be any assessment done, and we'll come back in the autumn, and we'll still be looking for an independent assessment to be done. So I think the best way for Pearse to advance his bill is to agree today, and the committee to agree today, that there would be an independent impact assessment done into the bill, so that over the course of the summer recess that work can be advanced. That's the most important step, in my view, that can be taken, and to ensure that time is not lost. Because Pearse, even if the committee today agrees to send a motion to the House, I think that would be a matter for select committee anyway, but even if it did, nothing happens until mid-September. That is the reality. So let's use that time now to agree collectively that an independent economic assessment be done into the bill. And I think that's the most practical way of ensuring that this issue doesn't go flat, doesn't die over the summer months, and that's what I would be proposing.
Minister.
All that is motivating both myself and my colleagues in attending this committee here today is to be fair and to be supportive of all those who depend on our banks, those who are in difficulty. That's why this government and my party has overseen such change to reduce mortgage arrears in our country, to help those who are in difficulty, to help those who are distressed with debt. We have done that. We have overseen a significant number of restructures in our economy, and we have seen quarter by quarter a reduction in the number of mortgage arrears in our country. So that's our track record, Deputy Doherty, and I don't need you impugning it in any way. That's been what this party and this government has delivered. And where you are consistent in is putting forward ideas that you pretend will solve all difficulties and not acknowledging the huge consequences of what you are looking to do. Huge consequences of which were acknowledged as risks by the Central Bank of Ireland and the European Central Bank. And at a time in which poor policy and ill-thought-out regulation cause such harm to our economy, you're perpetrating the same behaviour again. And I'm here, and my colleagues are here, to be clear that we want to ensure that those who need protection receive it, but those who need our banks for credit, to buy a home, to support a family business, they have to be present in this debate too. And that's what we're looking to do. And at the very least, an independent cost-benefit analysis, which my department would be happy to fund, but which would be independently chosen. I won't play any role in who will do the work. That's the decision for the committee. At a very minimum, that needs to be done before this bill can be allowed to move forward.
No, sorry, Deputy Murphy.
Yeah, just quickly. One, I agree with the interpretation of the Chair in terms of what we agreed last Thursday and how that's been implemented. Two, I think on a point of politics, what you see is classic. Fine Gael, open, defence of the vultures, Fianna Fáil, slightly less open, but attempting to be very effective in that way. And then three, I think the idea that we're just going to kick this into the long grass, I mean, everybody knows where that goes. We're on like a ticking time clock here in terms of a general election happening. We know even if we pass scrutiny, that it's likely that the government will simply refuse to give a money message, as they've just done in terms of the climate emergency bill. So, like, in my opinion, we should be meeting on Thursday and should be agreeing a report on scrutiny at that point in time.
Senator O'Donnell, Senator Horkan and Deputy Doherty.
I believe an independent economic analysis would very much inform the work of the committee in this particular project, and it's something I'd be very supportive of.
Senator Horkan.
Yeah, but just, I think if we're clearly not going to get the scrutiny, this report adopted today. There's a lot of amendments proposed by both the Minister, Deputy Doherty, Deputy McGrath. But I do think that if we don't do anything today, well, then we're coming back in September and we're maybe then looking for independent analysis. I welcome the fact that the Minister has agreed to effectively fund any independent analysis that this committee wants to do and that this committee will choose, which is, if I'm taking the Minister's words correctly. So we get to pick, the Minister will pay for it, we get to pick who will actually do it ourselves. And let's get on with the independent analysis and looking at this bill, because there are clearly concerns from the ECB and the Central Bank of Ireland, and clearly there is support within these houses to protect people as best we can in what we're doing. So let's get this show, if you like, on the road, so that when we come back in September, we don't then decide to do a whole lot of independent analysis, and it could be Christmas. So in fact, if anything, the amendment put forward by Deputy McGrath in terms of independent analysis actually speeds up the process, and rather than the opposite of, if we just kick it a touch now, shelve it, bring in the Deputy Commissioner now, we don't do anything until September at the earliest, which probably means we won't be even considering this going to committee stage until maybe Christmas.
Deputy Doherty.
Well, let me make 2 points. First of all, just in relation to the Minister's comments about who needs to be present in this debate, and his points are right, and I've been present in all of this debate. If the Minister was in attendance at the debate, he would have heard the Central Bank actually say that dealing with the issue of securitisation allays the majority of their concerns. That's the first and foremost, and it has been repeated time and time again that the drafting of the bill is not intended to have an impact on the issue of securitisation and would be amended or clarified at committee stage. So he can throw out accusations that I'm reckless or not aware of any potential consequences and all the rest. And the department paying for this, surely that's fine. I'm sure that if we ask them to carry out an analysis, independent analysis of the impact that vultures have had on people who have lost their homes, that maybe they wouldn't be so willing. But that parked to one side, how do we find a way forward? As I say, I don't fear anything in relation to testing this, but we have gone through months. It's been months since this has passed the Dáil, and we've had a process of scrutiny in relation to this. The concern I have is this, that the independent analysis is linked to allowing this to proceed to committee stage. Now, I have no problem. I think the proposal by Deputy McGrath for the committee to agree an independent analysis, we can look at the type of analysis that we carry out, is something that I would support. But I also would ask the committee to allow this bill to go to committee stage, with the understanding that it will not proceed at committee stage until the independent analysis has been completed and we have had time to reflect on that, so that it allows us to shape the amendments we have on the report. Otherwise, let's call a spade a spade. Otherwise, this is about scuttling the bill. That's the reality of it. That's the reality of it. So we can do two things. We can agree, and I know that there's divergence of opinion obviously from the Gaels very much and very clearly and stated consistently that they're opposed to this bill, and that's their entitlement. But we can do two things. We can agree here to carry out an independent analysis, time frame it for a period of 2 months, look at what the analysis needs to cover. Deputy McGrath has captured much of that, but also complete this report and allow us to report to the Dáil with a recommendation that we proceed to committee stage, with the understanding that that committee stage will not happen until the independent analysis has been completed. That allows us to be more informed. But the independent analysis is post-scrutiny. Scrutiny is complete, folks. Like this, otherwise there's a stall. Now that's a fair compromise in my view, and I can't see why. Well, it's up to Deputy McGrath to suggest whether he supports that or not. But
the report itself has to be completed and laid before the House. That's the process. and then the Select Committee has to meet to agree it. Isn't that right? Before it goes to committee. So, with the time frame that we now have, we have to set aside time to consider the report anyway, to consider it, before we can trigger a meeting of the Select Committee to decide on it. So, within the few days that are left in this session, that's what we are now faced with. So we're back to square one in terms of the timing, and for the members to agree with that timing. And if the Minister has offered, OK, the Department would fund it, and we can then select someone that will carry out that analysis of the full bill, not just the impact on one side, but the impact on the other side, which is vultures and customers. So it's for the members to decide. But we have a decision to make about finishing the report. That's the first decision that has to be made. Because we can't follow on Deputy Doherty, as I understand it, unless that's done.
Yeah, just if I may, Chair. Look, the reality is the report is not completed. The scrutiny report, it's not going to be completed this side of the recess. That is the reality. As you can see in the suggested terms of reference that I put forward in the amendment for the independent impact assessment, it relates to, amongst other things, consumer protection, to protection of mortgage holders and so on. And so, given that the report is not going to be completed this side of the recess, the question the committee has to decide upon is whether it wants anything at all to happen in the next 2 months. That's the question the committee has to decide, and you know, I say that in good faith. I think the
report can be completed, Deputy.
When?
We can agree this report on Thursday. The problem here is that you've linked the independent
Thursday
analysis.
is a select committee.
Yeah, but we can have a meeting. We can schedule a meeting for Thursday. We can meet next week, as we discussed last week. We can, you know, we're not. Everybody's not disappearing. This report can be completed. The problem is you've linked the independent analysis to the you've put a stop on the progress of this because of the independent analysis. What I'm asking you to do is lift that barrier and do both of them concurrently. Allow it to go to committee, but committee will not proceed until the independent analysis.
Just through the Chair, can I ask, through the Chair, if I can ask Pearse, what is the benefit of the report going to the House this side of the recess?
Well, first of all,
what's the advantage of that? There can be no committee stage anyway.
Well, first of all, committees meet in September, where the Dáil doesn't meet for about the 2nd and 3rd week of September, so there's a 3-week loss for a start. That's the first thing. The second thing is it allows us to prepare other amendments which are required for this report during the summer recess period. There is no disadvantage in doing it unless your intention is to block the bill.
Or unless you don't want an independent assessment.
I'm happy with an independent
Great,
assessment.
let's agree to it so.
But don't link it to progress of this bill. Don't link it to allowing it to go to committee stage.
The bill isn't progressing anyway until September.
No,
that's the whole point.
No, the next stage is agree the report. Michael, call a spade a spade. You want to block the bill. You want to block the bill, and the reality is
you don't want the bill tested.
I've already said that I'm happy with an independent analysis. You were hoping that the legal advice would come back and say it was unconstitutional. They haven't. You were hoping that the Bills Office would say that they would need a money message. They've said their preliminary decision is it doesn't. So therefore, it is now in your hands to whether we are going to allow banks to sell family homes to vultures willy-nilly, as we've seen last week, or not. I'm happy with an independent analysis. I'm not happy that you're using that as a stalling mechanism. There is a sensible solution here. Allow the report to go ahead, allow it to go to committee stage, but without having committee until the independent analysis is done. It's that test.
Murphy, I think.
That's what.
And Senator O'Donnell. And then we're going to make a decision.
If Deputy McGrath is serious about wanting the independent report and so on, but then what's wrong with that solution? Then we get scrutiny finished, we pass a report which includes reference to the need for an independent report. The Minister has said he's going to finance it. That's grand. That means they can get working on that. And then before we have committee stage, we have the report in front of us, and that informs our work. Well, what's the rationale to delay agreeing a scrutiny report until we have this technical report? The only reason to do that is if you want to just delay it and delay it and delay it. We can agree both things today, we can agree on tomorrow, we can do Thursday, whatever.
Senator O'Donnell.
I don't want to go into the reports, Chairman, but...
Well, please don't.
No. But the initial report stated that the committee couldn't come to a definitive position because of the lack of data available. This independent report will inform us in that area. That particular finding is taken out of the second report. That is a fundamental change in the reports. So if we are serious about acting as a committee collectively, Pearse, Deputy O'Doherty, then we should do our work in a constructive manner. A suggestion has been put forward, I think it's a very reasonable suggestion by Deputy McGrath, which is, over the summer period, to allow an independent economic analysis to take place on the impact of this report. I think that's very reasonable. Your suggestion is basically putting the cart before the horse, which is basically saying, let's start building a house and we'll apply for planning later. You can't do that. This particular, what's being proposed here, will inform our decision-making as a committee. I've pointed out one fundamental change, significant shift in the two reports. The first report, where it states that it's not possible, on the basis of that, it's not possible for the committee to come to a definitive position, I regard as, in relation to competing considerations, I regard as probably a reasonable position of the collective views of some members. So I think what's being put forward here, if we are serious to work collectively as a committee, I think is a very, very reasonable suggestion by Deputy McGrath. It's one I would wholeheartedly support.
Ministry, yeah.
Just on a point of process in terms of moving this forward, I have the Memorandum of Understanding here in front of me, which I understand is the document that has been agreed between the Oireachtas and Dáil Éireann and the Government regarding how private members' bills are to be handled. And it lays out in page 10, at the base of page 10, the following message to the Dáil. The Dáil Select Committee must consider, taking account of the scrutiny report, whether the bill should or should not continue to committee stage. Examples of grounds on which a bill could be considered unsuitable to progress to committee stage are as follows: further detailed policy analysis, major technical or legal issues identified, and drafting issues which cannot be remedied by way of amendment. All three of those issues exist with this current report.
Can you just give the three again?
There's 5 for completeness. Further detailed policy analysis, major technical or legal issues identified, significant implementation issues identified, drafting issues which cannot be remedied by way of amendment, and outcome that does not require legislation. And this is the first appendix of the Memorandum of Understanding on private members' bills. And on at least 3 of these grounds, there is clear argument as to why this bill requires further work before it goes to committee stage.
Okay, let me be clear again. This report that we're looking at is a draft report. There are significant amendments to the report. So regardless of what's in the draft report, the important word is that it's a draft report. There are amendments there which we have to consider. So the first decision that has to be made is, when are we going to consider the amendments and the report to complete it? Because the Select Committee can't make its decision based on these 5 points unless it has the report. Now, if we make a decision, for example, we could make a decision to consider this report in full next Tuesday or any other day or this week, whatever the members decide. Once that's done, we can then proceed with the finalising the report. The Select Committee needs that report to make its decision. So from a procedural point of view, that is the way forward. You could, if the Minister and the members agree, begin the process of completing the analysis that you're talking about as that work is being done. So it doesn't hold up the process. It allows us to get into the perfecting the report for the Select Committee. Now, that's the only decision that we have to make, because there is no final report. It is a draft report that can be changed by anyone or everyone on the committee and then agreed by all of us. We still have to make that report. The Select Committee can't make its decision. So can we decide on a date for consideration of this report and the amendments? That is really all we can decide here. So do you want to do it this week? Do you want to do it next week? I don't mind sitting any day of this week or next week or the week after, if it helps to get this matter sorted.
Just on a point of order, Chairman.
Yeah.
Is it not reasonable to say that, and I know, Chairman, between the first draft and the second draft, financial implications section is completely taken out of the second draft. And the financial implications, which was section 7, appears to have disappeared into thin air. And paragraph 24 that says in the first draft, the committee notes that a detailed impact assessment of the bill has not been carried out, just hinder the committee in considering the bill, which is a very reasonable proposition. So is it not reasonable to say, Chairman, that the committee can make a decision pending the outcome, pending the preparation of an economic impact analysis, independent economic impact analysis of this? We would defer consideration of the report and the bill until such a time as the committee receives such economic analysis. Is that not unreasonable?
You can decide whatever you like as members, but the sooner you make the decision, the better, because we're going round the houses here. So, Senator Horkan, is it?
Yeah. I'd like to propose that we would recommend that we do the independent economic analysis over the summer. We take the Minister up on his offer to sponsor it in terms of funding it. We decide who is going to do that, and we let them at it, because I think whatever comes out of that report will ultimately influence the report. There's no point having a report, and there's no benefit to saying, right, okay, we can have a press release saying it's been approved for committee stage, but nothing's going to happen before mid-September. And I mean, the committee might sit a week before the Dáil is sitting, but that'd be it. It wouldn't be certainly 3 weeks in advance of the other one. So I would have thought that would make sense. Let's agree the independent economic assessment takes place. I think that seems to be the view of most of the members. We agree that takes place. We get that report back. That influences how we finally, as a joint committee, compile our report and finish our report, and then let the Select Committee make a decision.
Deputy Doherty.
You know, no harm, but just let me say what I think. That's ridiculous. Like, this is just a massive, massive stalling tactic to try and scuttle the bill. Like, that's what it is. Like, you know, no harm. Kieran, you're talking about being reasonable, but you've been reasonable in the context that you want to do everything to stop the bill. You know what I mean? Like, let's call a spade a spade. Like, reasonableness,
Pearse,
you know,
Pearse.
look, we all, and you're entitled to do so. Because let me just make that point. But you're entitled to do so. You're entitled to do so because that is your opinion, and that's a valid opinion that you hold and you're genuine in relation to. I have a different opinion. So I come to this from my position as well, where I want this bill to proceed, although it does need to be amended. Now, let me just say this. On Thursday, we're dealing with another piece of my legislation on insurance contracts. Okay? We're going to committee stage. There's further analysis needed to be done by the Department of Finance in relation to it. But there's complete reasonableness in relation to Minister Darcy's approach with that bill. So we've agreed that that bill is going to committee stage, and if it passes committee stage here, that because it will fall to Sinn Féin's time to take it to report stage, that I will not take it to report stage until that analysis is done. That is how we work together, we get things done, and that is the approach that we should have here in this committee. But the reality here is that this bill, for some of you, has proceeded further than you thought. No money message required so far. Legal opinion has said it hasn't said it's unconstitutional, and therefore it now falls into the laps of TDs to decide which side are they on here and how do we balance all of this. So there are issues in terms of timing and delays. The Bills Office has to make a final determination. The Bills Office can't make a final determination until scrutiny is done and the report is late. So if we don't lay a report until September, you stall it further again. Now, scrutiny is finished. Like, if we wanted an independent analysis, we should have said that 3 months ago. And I'm saying at this point, I don't mind if we have another independent analysis. I don't mind if we have an independent analysis. I have nothing to fear in relation to that there. But we agreed scrutiny, we agreed witnesses, we agreed who should give written statements and come before us and all the rest. We have an obligation to report. The problem I have, and the fundamental problem I have, is that progress to the next stage, which is committee stage, which we all know is where the principles of the bill get dissected down and we change it, and some of it can be changed fundamentally, some of it can be changed minor, is where we adjust it. It would be helpful, yes, and I agree, let's have the independent analysis before that. But what is being proposed here is that this bill cannot progress until the independent analysis is complete. And I don't accept that. I think that's wrong. I think that's a cute way of trying to scuttle the bill while at the same time try and sound reasonable, because you know that thousands of people are being thrown to the wolves in the forms of banks selling to the vultures, and you don't want to be the person that is blamed for doing nothing while this happens. So let's finish the scrutiny. The report has to be finished. The scrutiny is over. The scrutiny can make recommendations in relation to any, and we can read all the rest of the, and by the way, the 3 observations of the ministers is only his view. They're not my view, and indeed they're not the view of the legal team either, in terms of that issues are unsurmountable. So there's a key issue here. We need to finish this report, and we need to lay it before the House. The terms of reference, or the memorandum of understanding, say very clearly that it is up for the scrutiny report to make recommendations. For example, what should be amended at committee stage. That's why I've argued that the issue in terms of securitisation need to be dealt with in committee stage. It also allows for you to make a recommendation that an independent analysis would take place, and that's fair. The problem here is you're linking that to actually no more progress in the bill until that is completed. And the reason for that, in my view, is because it's about stopping it there instead of stopping it at a later stage.
Deputy McGrath, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I do. Just to say that the scrutiny is not completed until we finish a report and we agree a report. Every member of this committee is entitled to put forward amendments to the report and to have those amendments duly considered in the normal way. And you are, to be fair, Chair, upholding the right of members in that respect. We have that right, and there's no report agreed until those amendments have been adjudicated upon. And just to answer Pearse's point, it is the case that if an independent impact assessment concludes that your bill will have a negative impact on interest rates, a negative impact on mortgage lending, on the availability of credit for SMEs, then I would not support it going to committee stage. That is the reality. So that is why I want this report done. So whether we deal with it now, we deal with it Thursday, or we deal with it next week, it is my position that there should be an independent impact assessment done and completed before that decision is made. I don't care when we have that debate, but I think that's a very reasonable position. The question that has to be adjudicated is whether we want to waste 2 months and do nothing. I am proposing that the committee agree today that an independent impact assessment would get underway as soon as it can be practicably organised. That's what we need to agree today.
Minister.
So, Chairman, if Deputy McGrath has made a proposal, the question is whether the committee is happy to accept that and to agree that this moves, that the independent assessment moves forward before we move to committee stage. I think Deputy Doherty will have an issue with that on the basis of what you said. Failing that, I believe this is such a significant issue that I do believe we need to bring clarity to where we stand. And the proposal that I would bring, that I would put to committee, is that we do this on Thursday.
Yeah, but the process is that the joint committee must complete the scrutiny report. So that has to be done first and foremost. We have the draft report, 2 draft reports, if you want to call them that. We have the amendments. We have a meeting on Thursday morning, and we can proceed consideration of that because it can't go to select committee until the scrutiny report is completed.
Thursday is
Sorry?
Thursday is select.
But we can
And
cancel
do joint.
Okay.
because there is no report for them to consider. So therefore, we have to complete a report. I'm proposing
Thursday is
on Thursday-
legislation.
Sorry?
Thursday is legislation, the insurance contracts bill.
Yeah, but for the period of time that we were to discuss the no consent, no sale bill, we can decide on some parts of this report and decide how we're going to move forward and set the dates for completion of that report. That's what has to be done. That's the process. So we can then go into the select committee on the other bill, so that's not delayed. And if we make that decision today, you can make your further dates of consideration of this report at that meeting. Because there's extensive amendments to it. So it's not going to be concluded in a half an hour. So I'm proposing that Thursday morning the joint committee deals with the report itself in terms of the amendments and the process for that report, because it's only on completion of that it can go to select committee, and that we do that on Thursday morning.
Chairman, are you proposing that this report has to go to select committee on Thursday?
No, I'm not. I'm saying that the joint committee would continue its consideration of the draft report and the amendments on Thursday morning. We won't complete it on Thursday morning.
Chairman, the independent analysis, does that have to be encompassed into the report? And at what stage would it?
Well,
would
you
it-
see, the
would it be put into
independent
the report?
analysis, Senator Burke,
Complete without it, though.
Without it?
well, we have no report. What are the guidelines for the analysis? What are they analysing? We have no report.
But Chairman, we not as a committee have to make a decision as to whether we would like an independent.
We can make that decision.
Report.
We can make that
Or not.
decision on Thursday morning. And I'm asking that we would make the decision now to begin consideration of the report that is needed for the Select Committee on Thursday morning. And I'm making it clear to members that there's a second piece of legislation that has to be dealt with, and that we will not, in my opinion, be able to complete the consideration of all of these amendments because there are many amendments in it. Is that agreed?
What is the time constraint on Thursday, Chair?
We start at 10 o'clock,
Yeah.
and then the second piece of legislation, which is a select committee,
Yeah,
commences at whatever time you decide.
that can be deferred to
But that's up to
later in the
Deputy
day or
Doherty.
whatever. Yeah.
I agree with your proposal.
So if you're agreeing with that proposal, we'll talk to Deputy Doherty about the bill for select committee, because we'll have two committees, joint and select, and at least it's dealt with at that stage. Is that agreed? Is that agreed?
No, it's not, because I want to ask a question first. That you are
What's the
suggesting
question?
we either conclude the report on Thursday or not. Are we concluding the report on Thursday?
Decide on Thursday what we do.
Meeting sovereign.
It's procedural things. We have to get stuff.
Is there a space to put in further amendments between now and then?
Yes.
And when will those amendments be circulated, and what is the deadline for the amendments?
It'll have to be tomorrow.
If there's further amendments to go in, I think it's only fair that we would allow them to go in between now and close of business on Wednesday or something. So at least we're starting the process. Otherwise, we're going to be talking about it again and again and again. So we're meeting on Monday. We're meeting on Thursday morning at 10 o'clock to begin consideration of the report and the amendments. Great.
Tomorrow, okay for the
Sorry?
Secretariat? You need to process them then, and if we're meeting
if there's
Thursday
more
morning.
amendments
If
in.
it's by close of business tomorrow, there's no time to turn them around for Thursday morning.
That's why I asked the question.
We have enough amendments in to consider anyway. We're not going to finish.
That's fine, but is there a facility for new amendments or not? And if there is, what is the deadline?
Can we do amendments up until 1 o'clock tomorrow?
Yeah.
Does that allow for a turnaround time?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, done. So we'll now proceed.
We'll
to the
obviously
second-
try to get them in earlier than that.
Yeah. Invite in the witnesses. want to welcome Deputy Commissioner John Toomey, Chief Superintendent Patrick Lorden and Mr Andrew McLinden, Director of Communications. Going to deal now with the opening statements, if you wish. Sorry, you can have your dealing with the opening statements. So who's giving the opening statement?
Deputy Commissioner.
Yeah, just write down this step.
To warm up.
Warm up here. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, committee members, and thank you for the invitation to meet with you here today. And just by way of introduction, I would like to reiterate that An Garda Síochána is determined to tackle insurance fraud and has and will continue to invest significant time and resources in doing so. I have provided the opening statement, Mr Chairman. I do propose to maybe just run through it in summary form. And by way of background, we have been actively involved in the Government's Cost of Insurance Working Group, and Commissioner Harris has met with Minister Darcy on a number of occasions, and senior officers from the Garda National Economic Bureau have actively engaged with industry groups and individual companies for several years. And I am joined here today by Chief Superintendent Pat Lorden, who is the Chief Superintendent in charge of the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau, who leads our work in that particular area. And for our part, An Garda Síochána is focused on identifying anybody involved in the making of bogus insurance claims and to maximise the potential to initiate prosecutions. And we believe that the best way of doing this is through a coordinated approach on a countrywide basis. And this can best be seen by a recent activity under Operation Coty, which we launched in April of this year. And its focus is the prevention and detection of insurance-related fraud and associated crimes. We had a specific day of action recently which focused on more than 20 insurance claims that we believed may be fraudulent and which in some cases had already involved payment made to claimants. Investigations carried out by the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau indicate that a number of targets in this operation have submitted multiple claims, in many circumstances while using false identities. The suspected bogus claims result from false claims of injuries sustained through slips and falls. During the course of the searches, additional evidence was gathered with a view to submitting files to the Director of Public Prosecutions, and the detectives from the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau also seized high-value cars and jewellery worth more than €300,000, along with a substantial amount of documentation and financial records. Additionally, on the same day, a number of search warrants were executed at other locations, and all evidence gathered under this day of action continues to be analysed as we speak. On an ongoing basis, we work to continue to make improvements to our processes, to our systems and our resourcing. And working closely with Insurance Ireland, updated guidelines for insurance entities on how to report insurance fraud to An Garda Síochána were developed and co-signed and published by the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau last year. In October 2018, Pulse was updated, and insurance fraud and other categories of economic crime were introduced as separate crime categories. And this will enable An Garda Síochána to monitor trends in the area of economic crime and plan an appropriate response. At meetings between Commissioner Harris and Minister Darcy, both parties agreed that private funding of a specialist insurance fraud unit was not the preferred option. However, discussions have commenced on possible opportunities to provide additional support in the areas of IT software, training and analysis. And Commissioner Harris has also informed the Minister that, in line with the overall Garda strategy, the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau will focus on major organised frauds, including insurance cases and additional insurance frauds at the centre, and the more complicated investigations will be conducted by the national unit, while the divisional units will focus on the less complicated cases with either support from the national unit or additional training being provided to them. This divisional-led approach that we talk about is currently being trialled as part of our divisional policing model, which is currently rolling out in 4 Garda divisions around the country. And in addition to that, the national unit will coordinate all of the investigations that are ongoing throughout the country, and that work is ongoing, so we can begin to get an idea of the information and the extent of the investigations that are ongoing. We are of the view that it is important that there is sufficient expertise at divisional level, and this year an additional 50 Gardaí have been trained, and over the last 2 years over 130 people have been trained out around the Garda division throughout the country. An additional 6 sergeants and 6 Gardaí were provided to the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau to work on this area and other areas of fraud, and we will extend that competition, and we expect it to run in the second half of this year, where additional resources will be provided to Chief Superintendent Lorden and his team. In the meantime, we continue to develop in-house expertise in investigating insurance-related fraud. We continue to provide training to the additional Gardaí, and all our detective Gardaí and detective sergeants around the country receive fraud training as part of their induction. And throughout this course, experienced fraud investigators provide presentations of both legislation and fraud investigation techniques relative to economic crime investigations, including the investigation of insurance-related fraud. Representatives from the private sector, including the insurance industry, are also invited to contribute to the course, thereby providing specialist insight into the relevant insurance sector-related topics. The report on the cost of motor insurance recognises that preventing insurance fraud is not the sole responsibility of one party alone, and this was re-emphasised at the Fraud Roundtable hosted by the Department of Finance. And at this, Garda Síochána are committed to engaging closely with the insurance industry, to meet regularly with the Insurance Anti-Fraud Forum to discuss and act upon ongoing issues. And this enhanced cooperation will be very important into the future. And to conclude, Mr. Chairman, and to repeat and reiterate what I said at the outset, I would like to again reassure members of this committee, members of the insurance industry and members of the public watching that Garda Síochána will continue to deal with insurance-related fraud. We continue to take this matter very, very seriously, and I want to re-emphasise the importance of insurance companies and individuals reporting frauds to Garda Síochána. As I said, we are determined to identify insurance fraudsters and seek their prosecution, and we are committing to do everything that we possibly can to achieve that objective. Thank you, Chairman.
Senator O'Donnell, I think.
Cathaoirleach, and I want to welcome Mr. Toomey, Mr. Lorden. Can I just a few quick questions, really, in the time. Deputy Commissioner Toomey, what are the number of reported insurance-related fraud have you been either got from insurance companies or members of the public to date?
Well, I suppose there are various different numbers. So if we're talking about insurance, or if we're talking about a fraud in its broadest context, you know, the number is you know, probably in the region of maybe 1,500 to 2,000, but over the last 2 to 3 years. But if we narrow that down to issues where we're having bogus claims.
Bogus claims, that's what I'm really on about.
Okay, so, and again, the difference between, so we investigate all fraud that's reported to us.
So the 1,500 to 2,000 over the last 3 years, what type of fraud?
That's all fraud. It could be any types of fraud that the Economic Crime Bureau could be invoice redirect fraud. It could
I
be,
want to specifically deal with insurance fraud.
Okay.
So how many insurance fraud?
So since last October,
Bogus insurance claims,
okay,
yeah.
since last October, we have in the region of 50. And if we extend that out then beyond to over the last 3 years, we have in the region of 230 to 250. Now, we have 250 claims. There could be a number of defendants in each of those claims. So if we have an individual accident, we might have 3 people in the car or 5 people in the car. So, that...
So the 200 to 250, that some of those could be 3 people in a car.
Yes.
And so really over the last, we'll say, 9 months, there have been roughly about, well, it would be what? It would be October, November, December, so it would roughly be 9-10 months. You've had 50 in total.
Yes.
And
of the type that we're talking about here today.
Okay. And they would have come directly from the insurance companies themselves?
Yes.
And are they across the board with insurance companies, or is there specific insurance companies that they're coming from?
They would be across the board.
What areas would they relate to?
They would relate to bogus accident claims and slips and falls.
As it currently stands, how many of those bogus insurance claims are currently under investigation or have been cleared? How many are still current?
Well, all of those 50 would be still ongoing, and they would be at various different stages of the investigation. Some of them, we would be awaiting decisions on prosecutions, and some would be in the early stages of the investigation.
And who are they being investigated by in Garda Síochána?
A combination of the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau or divisional units under the direction and control of the local superintendent. And an assessment is made by Pat Lorden and his team as to the complexity. And the more complex cases are dealt with at the national unit at the centre, where we have a team of people doing it, and the other ones are dealt with locally. We have a detective superintendent appointed as our liaison, working with the industry. So he liaises with...
Who is that?
Detective Superintendent Cryan, Michael Cryan.
C-R-I-M-E?
C-R-Y-A-N.
Or Cryan. And how long is he in that post?
He's in that post a number of months, but he was preceded by... He's newly appointed to the...
So it's not a new post, it is a post that's always existed. And typically, what would be the process? Typically, how long would it take to carry out an investigation? I'm more interested. And I suppose what you might tell me is, the 50 that are there since October, apart from the 50, are there others still under investigation? What's the total number under investigation at the moment?
Well, the total over the last number of years that we're talking about in this particular area is in the region of 220.
And are they still under investigation?
No, some of those have been through the courts and have been concluded.
So I'm more interested how many are still under investigation.
Well, I don't have a specific number on how many are kind of still under investigation, but what I can say is all of the complaints that we have received are investigated to a conclusion, either through the courts or as far as we can bring them.
And typically, how long do they take to investigate?
They would probably take, maybe 3 to 6 months, again, depending on the complexity, depending on the number of people that are involved in them. And some of these are not straightforward, depending on the timelines of when we're told about this, when they relate to. Sometimes what's reported to us relates to a number of years ago. So that adds to the complexity of it and the timelines.
That's roughly 6 a month, Deputy Commissioner. It seems relatively low. Would you regard the figure as low in terms of, we hear about major bogus claims and fraud? The number that are actually being advised to Garda Síochána appears to be relatively low. Would you regard it as low?
Well, I suppose in the context of the other demands that are placed on Garda Síochána, we would have greater demands in other areas. If we stick within the fraud area, if we stick within the area of the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau that Chief Superintendent Lorden deals with, this was not the biggest volume of crime that he's investigating at the moment.
And the other question I suppose I want to ask is, we hear deliberations in terms that Garda Síochána should have a designated fraud insurance section just for that purpose and that purpose alone. Why has the Garda Commissioner not been, I suppose, supportive of such a proposal Why is he going with a divisional-led model? You might just expand on that. And when you're talking about that, you might just expand on the number of personnel that have skills in investigating insurance fraud within Garda Síochána. And you make reference to it, but the level of expertise in terms of, we'll say, accountants, forensic people that would have the skill sets in terms of being able to carry out such investigations and what form those investigations would take. So the more specific macro point, why is Garda Síochána not establishing a specific insurance fraud unit within Garda Síochána specifically to deal with, I suppose, the scandal of insurance fraud out there at the moment?
Well, I suppose I'd answer that question in a number of ways, if I may. And the first thing was the proposal was for a privately funded insurance unit within Garda Síochána. And Garda Síochána want to provide a policing service to all members of the public, not just those that are funded. And we believe that our obligation is to provide the service that is needed, and not necessarily those that can come forward and pay. So that's the first, and that's a kind of as much an ethical issue as anything else. This is about, we in Garda Síochána need to police the country, and we will meet the demands as whatever they are. That brings me on to the second point of it. We will apply resources depending on the demand. And we are satisfied at the moment that there's sufficient resources there to deal with the demands that we've talked about, the number of claims that we've talked about, and as I said at the outset, the demand within the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau, this is not its largest area. And the Chief Superintendent dedicates those resources in that area. And that's constantly kept under review. I talked about the additional resources that will be provided before the end of the year. That's constantly under review. And the Chief Superintendent, through his Assistant Commissioner, will come to Garda Síochána and will make a business case for additional resources. And that's why the decision has been taken that somewhere in the region of 35 to 50 additional resources will be provided to the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau between now and the end of the year, and that's personnel, and that's demand-led. That's to meet the demand that the Chief Superintendent has put forward, that we're satisfied are required to meet the additional demand.
So the insurance fraud, you give a figure for 1,500 to 2,000 over the last 3 years. What was the specific number of fraud over there's 50 insurance fraud since last October, but what was the total number over that period of all fraud that was reported? I want to see what percentage we'll say, of fraud, what percentage does insurance fraud make up?
Well, the figure that we have over that 9-month period is in the region of 1,500. So that's the number. It's out of that number that we're dealing with.
So you're saying only 50 of the 1,500 relate specifically to insurance fraud?
Yes. To the issue that we're discussing with in particular here today. Now, there may be other ones that are in consideration that we've got information that we haven't completed our assessment on, but I wouldn't expect that those numbers will increase to any great extent from what we're talking about here today.
Okay, so but really,
if I could go on then, Mr. Chairman, to the other part of the question, yes, because it's important to try and understand the structure that we use. So we have a national unit which sits at the centre, and they deal with the more complicated, complex cases. So somebody, if there's international elements to it, if there's various different strands that bring the people all around the country, the Chief Superintendent and his team will direct and lead that. And they will provide assistance and expertise to a Chief Superintendent or a Superintendent at a divisional level in the less complicated cases, and the more straightforward one are then investigated by individual detective sergeants or detective guards throughout around the country. So all of our detective sergeants and detective guards are trained in fraud, so they get a basic training in fraud. Over the last number of years, in the region of 180 Gardaí around the country have got specific training in insurance-related frauds. So we have a tiered response to it. So we have Detective Gardaí who get a basic level, we have the next one up, so that's in the region of 180, and then in the region at the national unit, Detective Chief Superintendent Lorden has in the region of 100 resources available to him, and again, as I said earlier on, that business case has been approved to increase those resources.
I mean,
we demand that.
Deputy Commissioner, I'll finish on this point. We had the insurance companies in before us last week. Some of those insurance companies stated that they reckoned up to 20% of claims were fraud related. Yet we find here that of the fraud achieved complaints that would have, or I suppose, particular fraud-related items that would have been referred on to An Garda Síochána, report An Garda Síochána, it only makes up 3% of what happened since last October, with 1,500 in total, and only 50 of those related to insurance fraud, right? So, Chairman, I think there's an inconsistency with what we're being told by the insurance companies, some of them, and the reality of the actual complaints. And could it arise, Deputy Commissioner, to me, that you would get complaints on fraud and you would decide not to, we'll say, allow them to be regarded as fraud? So what I'm asking really is the 50 the figure of what you deem to be fraud? What would be the total number of fraud insurance complaints that you would have received, some of which you would not deem to being regarded as being allowed in the category of being insurance fraud? I'm looking for the total number of reports.
Well, I don't have that figure available to me here today, but I don't imagine that there's a considerable increase over that number, because the threshold is on the balance of probabilities. So if it's probable that a crime committed, we will accept it and record it as a crime committed, and we will commence an investigation. And that's different to the investigation is on a different balance of probabilities. But the threshold for the recording of a crime is a different threshold for the prosecution of the crime. So, you know, and we've a lot of liaison with the insurance industry. We have a very good relationship and working relationship with the insurance industry in terms of dealing with all of these claims, because we are as intent as they are on ensuring that there is no fraud committed.
And finally, if the demand increased significantly for An Garda Síochána in terms of reported insurance fraud, would you then look at the need for a specific dedicated insurance fraud unit within An Garda Síochána?
Well, the way I'll answer the question is we would then look at increasing our capacity to deal with it. I think the process, you know, going back to the original point, I think will we be looking for, you know, for a privately funded unit? The answer to that would be no. But we would be looking to provide additional resources in this specific area, as we would with any area where there is demand. We're always looking to provide sufficient resources to ensure that we investigate and provide an appropriate response to the community.
Thank you, Chairman.
Deputy Doherty.
Can I just take you through a couple of things just to clarify? Fraud. So, what's the difference between fraud and exaggerated claims, which is kind of a term that's being used now, or is exaggerated claims fraud?
I might ask Chief Superintendent Lorden to say that.
Yeah, just to answer that, I would see no difference between an exaggerated claim and fraud, and I think the view of the insurance industry is the same.
Yeah.
Not right across the board. Some parts of the insurance industry may say it was a mistake or somebody was trying to claim a little bit more by accident, but my view is that if you have a claim for €100 worth of water damage and you change that up to €1,000, that's fraud.
If you were in a car accident and claimed that you were injured beyond what you were, would that be seen as fraud?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But the difficulty we have with both of those scenarios is proving it.
Okay.
So if the householder has an invoice or a receipt for €1,000, it's quite difficult then to show that it is fraud.
Okay.
Likewise, with a lot of these fraudulent claims that you have, it's minor injuries enough. It's whiplash. So it's quite difficult for us to prove, when we do investigate this case, to prove that you don't have whiplash.
Yeah. So the guidance on reported of suspected fraudulent insurance claims to your code of practice with the insurance industry, it says the offence of deception related to exaggerated claims takes place. It goes on to say where it takes place, where it should be reported. So in your view, exaggerated claims which are defined as fraud, should be reported if they believe that they're exaggerated. Is that correct? Absolutely. Okay, that was the first question. In relation to Section 19 of the Criminal Justice 2011 Act, are you familiar with that section in relation to disclosure?
I am, yes.
Yeah, okay. So what onus does that place on me or any other person if I am aware of a fraudulent claim? Because fraud is one of the relevant categories in that legislation. What onus does it place on me or a person, as the legislation states?
Yeah, there's an onus on you to report it if you know that the information that you have can assist us in an investigation in showing that somebody else in the room committed a fraud or carried out an act of fraud. And there are a list of offences covered with it.
And if I don't report it?
There can be an offence.
So it's a criminal offence?
It is.
With a maximum potential prison term of 5 years?
Yes, but I think my own view on it is, if you're, and I presume you're talking about an insurance company here in particular, if you're an insurance company or you're a bank and you want to report a fraud or a crime, I think you should report it in the normal way that you'd report any crime, other than relying on the Section 19 report.
Yeah, but the Section 19 report, the Section 19 of the Criminal Justice Act makes it a crime for the insurance industry and the entity, including the person possibly, but definitely the entity. It makes it a criminal offence which not to report an issue of fraud.
That's correct.
So we have the insurance industry telling us, you know, giving us the spin about that the 15,000 cases, and obviously, you know, you could extrapolate there that they carried, if they believe that, if they genuinely believe that, therefore they probably conducted 15,000 criminal offences, you would argue, under Section 19 of the Criminal Justice Act 2011.
You'd have to see the scenarios that they're faced with when they land on their desk. And I mean, we would always say that, you know, you can look at a case and you can suspect all you like, but if you have no evidence there, or you have no proof that this happened, you know, there's really no point in starting an investigation if you have nothing to show.
That's from
and I always use the example of the shopkeeper who thinks that Johnny stole a bar of chocolate, but he has no idea whether he did or not. But he didn't like the look of Johnny going out the door. So, I mean, there's no onus there on that shopkeeper to report that gentleman for the theft of the bar of chocolate, because it's a mere suspicion at the back of his mind that this may be the person that did it. So I think,
and that's fair enough in relation to suspicion. Yes. So as opposed to stating facts.
Yes.
So when an insurance industry say that there is 15,000, then that's a different.
That's a different
matter.
Yeah.
Okay. And can I ask you, do you ever prosecute anybody under Section 19 for failing to inform the Gardaí of activity that would be relevant in the prosecution of a crime, and particularly in the relation to fraud?
I don't have the details of any prosecutions here, but I know they're very rare if they are there. It's quite new legislation. It's only there 4 or 5 years, or sorry, 2011, I think. It's used quite a lot in the auditing world, the accounting world, and the legal profession to report matters to us.
Yeah.
And we see quite a substantial amount of reporting. And obviously the insurance industry and the banking industry use it quite a lot. But it's rare on occasion that we come across cases where somebody should have reported something and they didn't. You know, the onus is on them to report it, and normally the entities we deal with are quite good at reporting matters.
See, you know, but like when we go to the figures then, and we have, what, 50 cases reported. See, I don't believe the spin from the industry that it's, you know, the 20% that's kind of debunked now in the public mind. But I also don't believe that it's as low as 50 cases. You know, what is the responsibility? Is it on the balance of probability that they have an onus to report?
Yes, I would say so. They have to suspect that a crime has been committed, and that they have information to show that a crime has been committed. Now, in fairness to the industry, the 50 cases we talk about could involve quite a substantial number of claimants in each one, as was pointed out by Deputy Commissioner Toomey. There could be 4, there could be 6. We have one case, for example, there are 14 people involved in one claim. So, I mean, that could bring the figures up probably closer to what has been quoted recently, to 600 or 700 cases. But it's still a long way, as you say, from the 20%.
Yeah, and see, there's an onus on the industry. There's not an onus, but there's a. If the industry reports a claim, they also have to follow through the claim. They have to appoint somebody. They have to work with the Gardaí district inspector. They have to report it to national level, and they have to stick with the claim, which actually creates a burden on the industry.
It does, but I think in fairness to the industry over the last number of years, they have all increased their workload dramatically in that area. Like even since I took up 4 years ago in my current position, most of the companies have taken on the challenge of challenging these claims, and I believe they're succeeding in quite a lot more cases that probably never reach us.
So what about they kind of have a responsibility if they're challenging them because they think they're fraudulent? They have a responsibility, regardless of their challenge, to report that to you under Section 19 of the Criminal Justice Act. But what about the cases that we hear of where somebody's in court, they've been involved in an accident, or they may not have been involved, it may have been a staged or whatever, or they've over-exaggerated their claim. The judge doesn't award any compensation or any money to them, and they walk out the front door. And people are kind of saying, well, this is somebody who was chancing their arm, putting in a claim. In fairness, the industry challenged the claim. The judge found on the industry side that there wasn't a valid claim here, but the Gardaí don't go knocking on his or her door to say, let's investigate you now for fraud.
Yes, this is a matter that came up several times in the Cost of Insurance Working Group, and there were different versions of how that was reported. Some cases it was reported to the Director of Public Prosecutions, other times it was reported to the local Garda station. But actually what we had said to the industry was, if your solicitor is in court and he's aware of the facts of this, your company should be reporting that then as a fraudulent claim, because we don't have a guard in court to witness what goes on in court. So the onus really should be on the insurance company's solicitor stroke representative in court to say, this now has potential to be a fraudulent case, and we are getting some of those.
But that you're getting some of those. But the thing is, the point here is that where they're not reporting, they are committing a crime. And I take your point that the Gardaí aren't supervising the courts and all that, and that's a point well made. But the Houses of the Oireachtas place the onus on the industry, on the company, to pass that information to the Gardaí. So by not passing that information to the Gardaí, where in those type of cases it's beyond the balance of probability, we've already had adjudication in a court of law, and failure to report that, is it not contrary to Section 19 in terms of open disclosure?
Again, you would have to look at each case. I mean, our proof is obviously beyond the reasonable doubt for a criminal case to prosecute, and we have a couple of those cases on our books at the moment. And when they arrive in the door as a complaint, the feeling we get is this is a very easy case to prosecute. But actually, when you dig into it, what's dealt with in the civil court, where the insurance company is dealing with it, for one, the complainant is more than likely obliged to get into the witness box and can be challenged with the evidence he gives in court. Whereas in the criminal case, he's not obliged to say anything to us when we go and knock on his door, as you say. We can call out at the door, and I know of cases where guards have called on people's door and they've been told, sorry, I have nothing to say in relation to this case. And there's not sufficient evidence there a lot of the time to make an arrest.
But I'm not talking about the individual who's trying to scam. I'm talking about the individual who tried to scam, who's walked out the front door of the courthouse after losing the case, but hasn't really lost anything. And the insurance industry, the insurance company, hasn't reported that to the Gardaí. That's a criminal offence.
I think in the circumstances, they have to be assessed on an individual basis, and we're dealing with these cases are dealt with in the civil court, which is different, as we all know, than the criminal court. And an assessment has to be made by the insurance company as to whether, on the balance of probability, they believe a crime has been committed, and in those instances, then they must forward that to An Garda Síochána for investigation. And in the context of our ongoing liaison, certainly there is no.
It doesn't say anything about the balance of probability or anything like that there. The onus on the insurance company at that point is, and I'll read it from the legislation, a person obviously can be a company as well. So a person shall be guilty of an offence if he or she has information which he or she believes might be of material assistance in preventing the commission by any other person of a relevant offence, or securing the apprehension, prosecution or conviction of any other person for a relevant offence. And a relevant offence is defined as fraud. So in the case where a judge has adjudicated that this was not a valid claim, and the insurance industry just goes home or goes back to their office and continues on working, they have, at that point, they have information which he or she believes might be of material assistance in the prosecution or apprehension of an individual. Like, I'm not wanting you to kind of say, you know, we need to be careful here because obviously they're crimes, you know what I mean, like, right? But this needs to stop. The insurance industry can't leave the court without, you know, you can't have this revolving door system. Like, so there is a responsibility on the Gardaí to also impress on the insurance industry that they have a responsibility, and if they're not reporting those cases, they are committing an offence, and the Gardaí need to be willing to step up and prosecute the individuals or the companies in that regard.
Well, I suppose the protocol that we have signed with the industry is an intention to ensure that there's clarity around what the rules and regulations and the working relations between the two. We have a liaison officer with the industry, so there are, Garda Síochána has taken, a lot of steps in terms of bringing clarity around the issue. And to be clear, as I said in the opening statement, on 2 occasions, where we receive a complaint of fraud, we will investigate it.
Yeah. On that investigations, the 50 complaints that you have from the insurance industry, and we're just focused on insurance here, how many of them have been withdrawn, or how many? Can you break them down in terms of categories? How many of those did you feel that weren't worthy of investigation?
Those 50 have been entered in, and they are being investigated as we speak.
All 50.
So they are being actively pursued.
Okay.
So there's no, they're not withdrawn, or as far as we're concerned, we're happy that a complaint has been properly grounded, and we're conducting a full.
Okay. All of them are live cases.
Yes.
All of them are okay. That answers that question. Two very final things. We had a suggestion in relation to. In the cost of insurance working group, where the private industry would fund a section of the Gardaí. I immediately objected to that. I think that regardless who they are, I don't think private money and the Gardaí should mix, and the independence of the Gardaí and everything that goes with that. So I'm glad that that's off the table, and we wasted a lot of time, in my view, in relation to that. But my concern is, and I am very concerned, Mr. Toomey, at what you said in your opening statement. You talk about discussions are commencing with the Department of Justice on possible opportunities where the insurance industry may be asked to provide financial support in areas that could assist insurance fraud investigations, such as IT software training and analysis. Is that not just another version of private money mixing with the Gardaí? That's, why are we going down this road?
Well, be clear, we're not talking about private money being used in any way, to resource on Garda Síochána. But the industry, if we consider the amount of information that the industry has available to it, which may be of benefit to assist us in progressing our work, I do think that there's merit in some of those that being discussed and pursued. So we have, if we look at our crime database, we do a lot of work through analytics to help us be more intelligent and smarter about how we go about our business. That's really what we're talking about here, is can we use the information that's currently available to enable us be more effective in terms of reducing people the opportunity to commit crime, but also then the possibility to bring people to justice.
Mr. Toomey, I welcome that clarification, but your opening statement says, and I'll read it back to you, however, discussions have commenced with the Department of Justice on possible opportunities where the insurance industry may be asked to provide financial support. financial support?
Well, it's in the context of the areas that I talked about. So as to provide the financial support, to provide the information and the data and the knowledge around that to enable us to do it. And I think
is it providing the data or providing financial support?
Well, the data will be provided. There will be a cost incurred in providing that for us, because we will want that in a certain format to enable so that we can work for it. So I think there's no difference between the two of them. But I suppose just to be clear, we're making a very clear distinction. We are not in favour of a privately funded unit in this area. And
yeah, I know that you aren't in favour of a privately funded unit.
We don't feel that we're going across the divide here in terms of what we're suggesting, in terms of if that information and there's work to be done to provide that in a certain format and to enable us to do our job, we think that should be done.
Yeah, but that's at their end. The insurance company will do it at their end. It's not a case that they will gift you IT systems or software or an app.
It's the data we want to be able to use in a format that's compatible with the systems that we have.
Yeah. The last question I have here is, I'm a strong advocate of an insurance fraud squad, a separate unit. The unit that we're talking about, the GNECB, has a number of subdivisions, 6 in total. Would that be correct? Which one does fraud fall under?
Fraud falls under the serious economic crime units, and we have 4 units dealing with that.
Okay, so which of what? So 4 units under the serious economic crime.
Yes, so they primarily deal with all of the serious crime, from maybe a couple of million euros investigation right down into bogus, maybe an accountant, a solicitor, or a policeman, whatever it doesn't.
And of the 4 units that are under that section, is one of those units assigned to fraud or insurance fraud? Or?
Not in its entirety, because those units would deal with a vast array of different frauds. There's over 20 different areas of fraud that they would deal with.
And what's
so there would be investment fraud, there'd be account takeovers, there'd be all types of fraud.
And what's the staffing complement there?
There's 4 guards and 1 sergeant in each unit.
Okay, so 16, 20 individuals. And off insurance fraud, what, in terms of, and this is kind of guesstimate, what portion of work would it take up in terms of the units?
Well, at the moment they have 3 very substantial investigations. So those 3 investigations would entail probably close to 60 different claims.
See, the reason I ask this here, because, you know, I'm hard in the insurance industry, but they also tell us this. They say, and you'll hear from other people as well, they say there's no point reporting fraud to the Gardaí. You know, this is the other side of it, because they do not have the resources. And unless it is something major, so unless it's organised, unless it's like the issues you're dealing with, which are multiple claims and organised and using fake identity and all the rest, it's not going to be investigated in a thorough manner. And it's probably next to impossible with only 20 Gardaí.
Well, they're investigating the complex ones. The less complex ones are being investigated all around the country, and they have had many successes, you know, throughout the country over the last number of years, investigating all types of insurance fraud. So, I mean, to say that we're not capable or don't have the capacity is not true. There are 132 guards trained over the last 3 years alone, 44 every year. They're not all dedicated 100% of the time to fraud. You know, and that's the world we live in. We have to take the challenges that come in front of us. But in the Economic Crime Bureau, where I am, those people, I couldn't say I can dedicate them 100% of the time to one type of fraud, because tomorrow morning a company might lose €2 million and we try our best to get that money back for them overnight or in the next few days. So, you know, you have to prioritise what's in front of you. But those 3 investigations they have are working well and will progress, you know, further in the next couple of months.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Chair, I'd like to welcome Deputy Commissioner Toomey and Detective Chief Superintendent Lorden. Thank you for the opening statement and for being here as well. Can I just start with the issue of prosecutions and convictions for insurance fraud? It has been incredibly difficult, in fact impossible, to get any data from the court service, from the Minister, as to whether there indeed have been any. Minister Darcy has referred to some cases anecdotally, but under the Civil Liability in Courts Act, do you have any data on how many convictions there have been in Ireland in respect of insurance fraud?
Chair, I think if it was possible, it would be best, I think, to provide a written note on that, because I can give you numbers, but it's not a straightforward answer, and we would conduct an investigation in one area, and it might lead to a prosecution in maybe in a slightly different related area. So I think we need to Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, just to be clear, what we're talking about is the offences under Section 29 of that Act, and what prosecutions have been brought and convictions secured. So it's proven very, very difficult to get any data whatsoever on that front. And in terms of the role of the DPP then in this area, so let's say that a case is an insurance claim is thrown out of court on the basis of false and exaggerated information being provided. Is that ever referred to yourselves by the justice concerned, or directly to the DPP? How does that work, or does it ever happen?
It has happened on some occasions where in some cases complaints have been made to us. So if it's made to the Director of Public Prosecutions, it's then forwarded on to us. But the majority of those would come to us via the insurance company.
Right.
That's the mechanism through which it would come to us. I just have to check our records to be absolutely 100% sure.
Okay, that's fine. If you could check and come back to the committee. And without going into numbers which you don't have, is it the case that there have been prosecutions and convictions in respect of insurance fraud?
Absolutely, there have been convictions in relation to insurance fraud. Absolutely.
Okay, but you will provide the details.
Absolutely,
to the committee.
yeah, and because it's I just need to ensure that what we're providing is accurate.
Yeah, that's fine. We hear some insurance companies, and we see reports on, whether it be Prime Time Investigates or on the newspapers of tourism fraud, and that Ireland has been identified as something of a soft target by gangs coming in and staging accidents and so on like that in order to benefit from what might be regarded as a generous claims environment and system of awards. Is there any evidence of that? Are any of those cases being actively investigated? Is there tourism fraud?
Well, there are examples and cases where claims are being exaggerated and people are attempting to manipulate the system. Yes, is the answer to that question, and some of those are the investigations that Detective Chief Superintendent Lorden is investigating it. And I suppose that is an example. If I can just go back to an earlier point that I was making, they're some of the more complex ones, and they're the ones that will be led by the national unit. So the answer to your question: are there claims or investigations ongoing in the circumstances that you talk about? Yes.
Specifically now, where people come into the country for the purpose of carrying out insurance fraud, staging an accident and making an insurance claim.
We can provide detail on that to you, but yes, I'm certainly aware of a small number.
Okay, which are being actively investigated?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I suppose, again, just to reiterate, where we receive a complaint in relation to the commission of a crime, we will investigate it. And I mean, I can't stress that enough, that where we receive the investigation of a complaint, we will investigate it, because we're intent on removing people who commit fraud, any type of fraud.
And how difficult is it to get a conviction?
Well, I mean, every case is different. I'm not sure it's possible to answer that question. Because every case is different. Some cases the evidence is stronger than others. Some cases the witnesses are better than others. The only thing I can say is where the issues are available to us and where the evidence is available to us. And this is, whether it's international or it's still available to us. And we have very good relationships right throughout Interpol, through Europol, and on an ongoing basis we use those mechanisms to provide evidence to enable prosecutions on a daily basis.
This divisional-led approach, you said in your opening statement, it's being trialled as part of our 4 divisional policing model pilots. How many divisions are there in the country?
28.
28. 20. So this is being trialled in 4 of them, is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, and who are those for? Is that public knowledge? Or?
It is, yeah. Galway, Mayo, Cork City and South Central, the DMR South Central.
Okay.
But it's not, I suppose, for clarity, we have divisional representatives in all of our Garda divisions. This is just an enhanced model that we're rolling out in terms of streamlining the entire Garda division and all the policing activity in it. So there are people trained throughout the country. This is just an enhanced model of policing that we are rolling out.
Okay, so just so that we're clear on the structure here and the hierarchy, so more complex cases are investigated nationally.
Yes.
By the National Economic Crime Bureau. And then if the crime occurs within one of the 4 areas being trialled and it's not at the complex threshold, then it's dealt with at divisional level.
With assistance from the National Economic Crime.
Okay, and if it occurs within one of the other 24 where it's not being trialled, then, but again it's not at a complex enough level to be dealt with nationally, then who's investigating it?
Well, so there's 3 tiers.
Yeah.
Tier 1 is the national unit. The second one is a second tier of investigations that are slightly more complicated than the normally basic ones, and that's where the assistance is provided then by the national unit, and that assessment is done by the detective superintendent we mentioned earlier on, and then the other ones are investigated by the detective Gardaí that are in place throughout the country. Okay. So in the context of, there are trained people dealing with fraud investigations right throughout the country. And if assistance is required, if more expertise is required, that's provided from the national unit.
Okay, so are any Gardaí focused exclusively on insurance fraud?
Yes. In Cork City, there are Gardaí dedicated to insurance fraud, but in many other divisions, there are Gardaí not maybe in an official fraud unit, but they spend the majority of their time. And I know several of them have very good cases and very successful cases throughout the country. They're dedicated almost 99 to 100% of their time on fraud. And more we're seeing chief superintendents around the country dedicating people towards fraud. Even as we speak, we have people travelling up from the country to spend 2 or 3 weeks, in one case 3 months, with our unit to gather further information and knowledge so that they can bring it back to their divisions. But I think to point out what Commissioner Toomey was saying, just because we have 4 pilot divisions, there are Gardaí trained in all of the other divisions. Okay. And I'm not just talking about 1 or 2, there are 5, 6, 7, 8 people trained in most of those divisions.
And if that trialling works in those 4 divisions, is the intention then to roll that out to all 28 Garda divisions?
Yes.
In what time frame?
Well, we're hoping that will certainly commence before the end of the year. The conclusion time will probably be a little bit further down the road, but we do expect that the original pilot in those 4 Garda divisions will be assessed during the 3rd and 4th quarter, with commencement of the extended rollout commencing then after that.
And have any additional resources been provided to back up this new approach, this divisional-led approach?
Yes, they have. Yes, they have in each of the 4 areas when we were looking at it, and we've streamlined the administrative process in that. So we've provided administrative resources, and we have redeployed a number of Gardaí out of administrative posts in each of those 4 areas. And then from some of the new recruitments coming out of the Garda College, we have provided additional resources to frontline policing, particularly in the area of community policing.
Okay. And then just finally, so you say since October 2018, 50 reports of potential bogus insurance claims have been referred to the Gardaí. They have all been reported by insurance companies. Is that the case?
That's the case, yes.
Are there other channels through which suspected insurance fraud can make its way to yourselves?
Absolutely. Well, individual people can come and make a complaint to us if they think that they have been affected by it. Yeah. So and you know, we get fraud-related complaints will come to us from the insurance companies or through members of the general public primarily. Okay. So is there a figure on top of the 50? The 50 were referred by companies? Yes, and that 50 are, I suppose, specifically relate to the topic that we're talking about here today. Yeah. In terms of that kind of exaggerated claims or false claims.
Yeah, you know, but that's from companies.
Correct.
So is it a significant further figure then of reports from the public, from other sources.
Well, we mentioned a figure earlier on of in the region of 1,500 other fraud-related.
Yeah, but insurance fraud.
Yes, yeah, but the 50 is in relation to this insurance fraud from the companies is the figure that we're talking about.
Right, and there aren't many others from. You're shaking your head,
no.
Mr. Lorton. No, so
Yeah,
so it is.
there
it is about
a
50.
few examples of, say, somebody reporting their mobile phone to a company that insures it, a false claim in relation to that matter. You know, there wouldn't be that many. But just to clear up one point, there was a feeling from some of the private businesses out there that they couldn't report to the Gardaí the same way that insurance companies could. But at a recent meeting I clarified that, and there are plans in place now to draw up guidelines for those other industries to report if they need to report it to us.
I mean, when the head of AXA was here last week, he told us that they achieved savings last year of €90 million in the area of fraud. I think he said it was about 4.5% of gross written premium. So that's a very substantial figure. So there's something not quite matching up here, given the very low number of referrals. They either have no confidence that cases can be taken through the system, and that's not necessarily your fault. It could be the judicial system, the legal framework, the burden of proof being so high, but there just seems to be an enormous mismatch between the level of fraud that the companies are telling us is happening in the market with the very low level being reported to you. Like, have you any observations on that?
I think you hit the nail on the head with the standard of proof is quite difficult for us to reach, and a lot of the insurance companies are utilising their own expertise in establishing this may be an exaggerated or fraudulent claim, but that they don't believe they've reached the threshold where they need to report it to us, that they won't have the success, as you say, when they go to the Gardaí. Sometimes these are 4 and 5 years old by the time they establish that there's fraud there. There's no CCTV, there's no phone records. You're really relying on somebody to talk to us as a witness, and that's quite difficult to get.
So is it your view in the round, with the experience you have, that the actual level of fraud is in excess, and perhaps significantly in excess, of what is being reported to the Gardaí?
I think in all fraud area, worldwide, the amount of fraud that's reported vis-à-vis the amount of fraud committed, there's a dramatic gap there between what's reported to the police in any Garda station or any police force throughout the world. If you look at the statistics worldwide, fraud is one of the most underreported crimes worldwide, and primarily because it has grown dramatically. You'll see even in Ireland this year, the figures for the first quarter is showing up 28%, the amount of reported fraud in the first 3 months of this year.
Wouldn't you think, finally, Chair, that the insurance companies who have a vested interest in this would like to make an example of those who are bringing fraudulent claims, and would like them held up in a court of law in public and to be convicted of insurance fraud? Wouldn't you think that that would be in their direct financial interest to do so? And yet they're referring so few cases to you. I suspect after last week that may change over the period ahead. You might need to look at extra resources in this area, because I think they will now feel obliged to refer more cases after last week and after today. But it's hard to understand why they haven't.
It's a difficult one to answer, I suppose, from the point of view that there is a threshold required to even start an investigation, not alone get to the successful stage of doing a file to the DPP and to succeed with a prosecution. So it is a difficult one for the insurance companies or the banks or anybody else dealing with the financial world to reach that threshold.
Okay, thank you. We look forward to the written response on those outstanding points, please.
Thank you, Deputy
Thanks,
Chair. Senator Horkan.
Thanks, Kerr. A couple of points. I mean, again, we've touched on the fraud being very low in terms of what goes to you guys. In terms of the total amount of case you deal with, insurance fraud is what percentage of your total that you would investigate on a yearly basis?
It's very low. I think the figure quoted earlier was about 3%, thereabouts. But there are other areas of fraud in the insurance world that we deal with as well. So there's ghost broking is very prominent out there at the moment. So that's an area we deal with the insurance companies on a regular basis, and we have dedicated people there in our traffic unit in Dublin Castle, and they're dealing with hundreds of cases there of that type of fraud on ghost broking. And there's also...
Just explain that, sorry.
It's basically where a criminal sets up as a broker, pretending to be an insurance broker and insures your son's car for €500, but he has realistically got the insurance policy from a legitimate company by providing false information. So your son is now thinks he's insured for €500, but actually the details provided obtained that insurance were completely false and made up. So in reality, he's in a difficulty if he has an accident.
So he thinks because he has a disc that he's okay, but he's actually not. Okay.
And you have the other scenario where people pay up their first instalment and then refuse to pay the balance of it. So they've only paid 2 months of a 12-month policy, and they are going around with an insurance disc on their window. So there's quite a lot of investigations in all that area being carried out with the insurance companies as well.
And does ANPR now catch those kind of people? The number plate recognition?
Yes. We have the ability where the information can be provided and uploaded to our ANPR system, which will identify these vehicles where the insurance has lapsed.
When we were discussing motor insurance 3 years ago, there was a report that at the time the ANPR system was relatively new and it was reporting a lot of false positives. Has that improved?
That has improved. I think a number of years in that intervening period, the data was removed. And work has been done on it, and it has now got to a state because it's changing. People were changing company every week. There were, and as you say, there was false positives being provided. So the information has improved in recent times. Yes.
And in terms of ANPR, how many vehicles are out there dealing with that now?
It's in the region of 110, 120 vehicles at the moment, but it is intended that will increase.
So they're positioned on motorways, on roads, and they will automatically be scanning number plates. And if it's either not insured or taxed, is NCT covered?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
NCT is not covered. It's primarily tax and insurance. But those vehicles are deployed in our roads policing units, so they're primarily focusing on road offences.
But if somebody has signed up to a 12-month insurance system and they've only paid 2 months, the ANPR system knows that this is now a car that's uninsured.
If the system is properly updated back at the back end, we can all. If
you're relying on insurance companies.
Correct, and we're relying on the information being accurate that we have.
Okay. In terms of investigating fraud. Obviously, we're saying that it is if somebody becomes aware, anybody becomes aware of a fraud, what's the mechanism for them to report that?
Well, it's
somebody thinks I know somebody's had an insurance claim and they said it was a skiing or there was a trip in a nightclub or it was a slip, and everybody knows it's talk of the town, it's talk of the area that we all know well. They're bungee jumping or they're going on holidays, and we see insurance companies using private investigators in some cases. How does an ordinary member of the public, in the case of a known insurance fraud, and I accept that lots of time you won't know, but if you did know, what can you do?
It's the same way as reporting any crime. So you go to a member of An Garda Síochána and you make a statement of complaint. And that complaint is investigated. Again, we will follow the evidence. We will follow the evidence, and whatever that evidence is, if it's provided to us, we will investigate, we will interview other people, we will gather evidence, we will bring up in the same way as we will investigate any statement of complaint that a crime has been committed, that we will do that.
But is that person then would be expected to turn up in court and make a statement in court? That's obviously a reasonably serious level of deterrent for a lot of people who don't want to be caught, well, if you want to call it, on their neighbours, on people that they're aware of. There's no mechanism for people to anonymously or to disclose what their concerns about somebody.
We will always initiate a statement of complaint and an investigation of a crime on the basis of a complaint. So we will have to have a statement of complaint. Now, there are in some cases where we have become aware of information ourselves, and we go and we will investigate those. But primarily, the simple method for investigating a complaint is when that complaint is made to us. But there are opportunities and there are times when, if we come across that evidence and that information ourselves, we will pursue it. But so there's a balance between a complaint being made to us and an anonymous complaint, you know, there is a balance to be struck.
I mean, I appreciate vexatious complaints that have no grounds, but if somebody's aware, an awful lot of the time people will not want to make, and for other people to be aware that they have concerns about somebody. And there are examples, insurance companies told us, and I'm sure you have examples of the same family has been incredibly accident prone, putting it mildly, or a certain part of a city or certain parts of the country are much more involved with accidents, and you hear of families, prime time type scenarios where 30, 40, 50 accidents have been staged, or they've been involved at least in 30, 40, 50. There's no way for people to make complaints without being effectively possibly being brought to court.
Well, that information is available to the insurance companies, and the insurance companies are best placed to see those connections across the industry. And there's some of the investigations that we're talking about here now, and that day of action that we talked about in April of this year was focusing on some of those very issues that you talk about. So the information and the database that the insurance company has provides that opportunity for those particular people and those cases to be, you know, to be notified to on Garda Síochána, and that's the analytics that I'm talking about.
And again, just to tease it out, if an insurance company is aware of these things and they don't bring it to you because their argument is they don't have the burden of proof, are they guilty of an offence? By not bringing it to you, and for you then making the judgment, we will investigate so far, but we can't go any further, because is it the duty of an insurance company to report if they have 60,000 claims and they reject 10,000 of them? They've rejected them for a reason. They reject them because they believe they don't have, and these people have walked away in many cases and said, right, we'll put up with it, we'll live with it. Those 10,000 people, the insurance company is aware and has made a decision not to pay out. The people have walked away. Should not all 10,000 of those go to you guys, and then you guys have to assess? I appreciate there's an administrative burden, there's a staff burden, but that you should be investigating a lot more fraud if it is actually in existence.
Well, I think Section 19 is relatively clear in that regard, and that if they believe or are of the view that there was a breach here, they're obliged to report it to us. And I think that's the purpose of Section 19. So I think that's a consideration that they have to make. I suppose I'd probably flip it the other way around and pose the question, well, why wouldn't, you know, what's the rationale for not forwarding it to Garda Síochána, and are they satisfied that that threshold is not beyond the threshold?
Well, that's my point, is that they should.
I'll just say,
conclude.
10 minutes left.
I'll literally conclude now on this point, just in terms of.
Sorry, excuse me, Senator. We have 10 minutes left, and I have Senator Welch and Senator Burke, so go ahead. Okay,
thank you. Just to conclude, in terms of your fraud insurance, it's 3% of your total. Is most of that motor insurance, or is there public liability? We see people, you know, some very diligent business owners have. You know, you hear if somebody says, I slipped, and then all of a sudden there's a fight where somebody hits another friend in a fight, and the tooth is knocked out for that reason. They showed them the footage, and all of a sudden they walk away. Should not all of those be investigated? And in terms of your insurance fraud, which is 3% of your total fraud, how much of it is motor insurance? How much of it is everything else?
It's primarily motor insurance, but in more recent times the slips and falls have begun to become more frequent in terms of those being reported to us. And I think that's possibly related to some of the increased media and the increased focus on that people are actually realising that there is actually a, you know.
And to conclude on that, you would recommend the likes of Supermax, the likes of nightclubs, the likes of pubs, restaurants, if they have CCTV footage, if they've proved to somebody and told them to go away and they've gone away, they should be bringing it to you and saying, we want this person prosecuted.
If they in any way, absolutely, if they in any way feel that a crime has been committed, they should be reporting that to Garda Síochána, and we will investigate it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Gerry.
Senator Burke.
Thanks. Welcome, Mr. Toomey and Mr. Lordan, to the committee. Just a few brief questions. In relation to the reported number of fraud cases, is there a percentage breakdown between the private sector and the public sector? Would public sector be bigger in the reported cases of fraud?
The majority of reports we have are from the private sector insurance companies.
From the private sector?
Yeah.
Not from, but there's a lot of insurance claims made against local authorities and various other government agencies and the public sector in general. But
No, the majority are from the private sector.
Would you say it's 20/80 or 60/40, or you have no idea?
I would say it's, like, if you were to look at the public sector, there are very few reports.
And the CCT cameras would play a bigger role in the likes of somebody falling on a footpath or whatever. Is it how they just pay out, or you have
As
no
we say,
idea?
we have very few reports received, so the ones we have are progressing. One of the ones we have ongoing in my bureau is a very complicated one from the private or from the public sector. But I mean, we don't see that many reports.
So you would think that the public authorities or the public sector are not that diligent at all in relation to reporting cases of fraud? Or do you think more could be done in relation to...
I wouldn't comment on it because I don't know enough about their cases. We don't see the cases that they settle, or we don't see the cases that go to court. But I suppose the one thing about CCTV is if you trip or fall and you say, I hurt my leg in one format, unless that person does something to put in a claim or to do something about it, you won't reach a prosecution, in my opinion. You know, you have to the person has to progress to putting in a claim or doing something to make the effort. So
yes.
Oftentimes, if it's called out very early in the stage, you're left with a scenario where you said I tripped on the footpath, but actually you may have had a few drinks and you tripped on the footpath.
Yeah.
And then you've walked away. So you won't have made an affidavit, you won't have made a statement, you won't have made a complaint at that stage. Some of those are quite difficult. So I think you're better off addressing that to the public sector and see what they say.
So in any event, you're saying that there's very few claims made by the public sector in relation to fraudulent claims?
Very few.
In relation to the fraudulent claims, car cameras and CCTV cameras or CCTV cameras, do they play a big role in relation to exposing the fraud that takes place?
Not really, because the majority of these cases that we're seeing now are not even reported to the Gardaí when the accident occurs. It's reported maybe as a minor accident, and then subsequently a couple of months later the 5 or 6 claims come into the insurance company. So in most of these cars there is no camera because they will be the culprit's car, and if they're working together with another party, they'll make sure that they don't have any cameras in their cars, and they'll also make sure that where the accidents are occurring now won't occur where there's any CCTV. Historically they weren't as good at that, and Operation NASCAR down in Cork covered that fairly well, but now we find that they're careful about selecting the location of where they're going to have their accident.
On a separate issue, and finally, in relation to forgery, which is separate to the insurance, I suppose it's fraud as well, forgery. Is there many cases of forgery, and how do they progress through the courts, or how do you follow up on forgery?
I suppose the one that we're seeing quite a lot of is bogus or forged no claims bonus certificates. We're seeing quite a substantial amount of those being reported throughout the country, and people are being prosecuted for that.
And is it the person with the disc that will be sued for the forgery?
Oh, sorry, you're talking about a forged disc. Sorry.
Yeah, saying the forged
yes,
disc.
there would be quite a substantial amount of prosecutions for either forged tax disc or forged insurance disc, things like that.
Yeah, but in relation to forgery itself, we'll say in relation to money forgery, is there many cases of that type of fraud?
Yes, we had a case at the weekend where a substantial amount of forged money was recovered in a house. So there's quite a lot of forged money still going around the European Union.
I was in a bank recently where the bank gave out a €50 forged note, and I presume that the person responsible, while the machine gave it out, when the person tried to put it back in to pay off money in another account, putting it in through the machine, it rejected it. but I suppose he has to go through a whole rigmarole of reporting to the Gardaí and to the bank.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I'm sure that the bank wouldn't take responsibility for that, would they? Even though the machine gave out the money, it refuses going into another account.
I'm not sure, you know, what the circumstances of the withdrawal were, but I mean, what we see is we see several notes coming into our office every week from all different parts of the country, and we return them to the central bank. But I can't comment on the individual case you're talking about because I don't know enough about it.
Yeah, but the bank would have to own up as well, would they? Or the bank could be not complicit in it, but they would. I'm sure it was them that gave it out in this case.
But it may be as simple as the previous customer handed in €50 to the bank over the counter, and they handed it out to the next customer,
Yeah.
so the bank may know nothing about it.
Yeah, but they won't be held responsible, I presume. Thanks, Chair.
Senator Conway-Walsh.
Thank
1
you,
minute.
and thank you for the presentation. Just a couple of things. In October 2018, Pulse was updated and insurance fraud was then categorised. What was the classification before then?
Before that, all frauds across the spectrum were recorded as deception, as theft other. They were going into different categories of theft and fraud. So basically we saw with the increase of the different areas of fraud, one of them being insurance fraud, and there are many others. There's, you know, the letting of properties, there's bogus collectors, there's romance fraud, there's invoice redirect, business email compromise. So we've set up a separate drop-down menu on the Pulse system for all of those. There's over 20 categories now on the Pulse system.
And you say
insurance fraud is one of them.
economic crime as well. What
Well, it all comes in under economic fraud and economic crime. That's the heading for all of the frauds. And then there's 20 plus breakdowns of the different types of crime under the fraud and economic crime.
So we really don't have any empirical data before 2018, do we, in terms of determining the increase or the decrease in insurance fraud?
It was very difficult to pull the statistics. And I suppose the one thing to be aware of here today is that there is no such offence under law as insurance fraud. And that still creates problems for us. You know, it's not a specific offence under legislation.
Okay, and do you think it needs to be? Obviously,
I don't think it needs to be, no.
But why does it create difficulty? If it creates difficulty for you, then obviously it would need to be. It would need to be classed as a.
But there, it's covered well under the legislation that we have. But you don't have a specific offence for all the different types of crimes that are there under financial crime. Otherwise, we'd be adding a new type of crime every couple of weeks with the way the criminals are thinking out there. So, for example, we don't have a standalone type of crime for romance fraud, which is quite new on the spectrum of crimes. So it comes in, most of them come in under with a charge under the theft and fraud offences.
Okay, so they're all categorised now. So since 2018, you'll be able to measure and monitor those. Yes. In terms of how it might look. Just, you referred to the pilot projects. Can you just briefly tell me, so one of them is obviously in Mayo, what that might look like in terms of an insurance company reporting insurance fraud to you tomorrow? How would that be different? Just talk me through the steps, maybe.
Well, in essence, what we've tried to do, we've tried to make the policing operation in the Garda division more efficient. So in the Mayo division we have a specific administrative unit. So there's a team of people who look after all the administrative work, and that has resulted in a number of members of Garda Síochána being redeployed to frontline policing.
So that's administrative. I just need to get it clear in my head. That's administrative work. Where is that based in Mayo? In Castlebar?
Castlebar, yes.
So there's an administrative team there dealing with just insurance fraud. No,
they're dealing with administration. But okay. So there's a number of areas that the revised division of policing model has focused on. So it has streamlined the administrative process to free frontline Gardaí, free Gardaí to be redeployed to the front line. It has also streamlined then the investigation of serious crime, and there's now a detective superintendent in that area who has responsibility for the investigation of serious crime. And heretofore, that crime was investigated by each of the individual superintendents. Now the superintendent has the more serious crime is allocated to a detective superintendent who coordinates that investigation. And again, that enables the district officer, as we know, to focus on providing that frontline response service to local communities. So it's making the whole process within the community more efficient in terms of how we work it. And as part of that, the resources then are reporting to the detective superintendent. Additional training is being provided from the National Economic Crime Bureau, with that support coming from the centre.
Right, but it's not particular to insurance fraud. It's just fraud.
No, it's policing generally, but some of the efficiencies should be felt in terms of that in greater time to investigate the likes of these issues and these and other issues.
Yeah. How long has the pilot project been running?
It's running since around February of this year.
Okay, so it's too soon to tell what the outcomes are yet?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, in terms of the training that's been done, what does that constitute? I know from here, but what's the duration, say, of it? In particular, if a Garda or a sergeant is being trained in insurance fraud, how many?
Well, every detective, Garda and sergeant will get specific training in relation to their detective duties and the investigation of all serious crime. In the area of fraud, we have 132 completed and there's another 50 in progress this year. They get enhanced training in the area of fraud investigation.
Yeah, how many days?
I think that programme is a week-long training programme.
So they get it.
No, I'm open to correction on that, Mr. Chairman, but that's.
And in terms of competing resources for this, obviously you're trying to take insurance fraud more serious. So is there additional resources ring-fenced for that, or are you? What I'm trying to get is that taken away from community policing, and where there's policing need in other areas? Invariably,
it'll be detectives, plainclothes Gardaí that will do the insurance-related fraud. And the uniform Gardaí are ring-fenced and provided for community policing. So the intention is that it doesn't take away from that overt policing. As we outlined earlier on, it is demand-led, and it will be, in the areas of Cork, they have a dedicated unit to investigate fraud, such as the demand there, and in other areas. And then in other areas, such as the demand that they believe that they can investigate it, that there are sufficient resources where they don't need to dedicate people full-time to this. So it varies case by case. It varies in every Garda division, and it varies dependent on the demand.
So why did you pick Mayo for the pilot project?
Well, we picked 4 different areas, and we believe that the 4 of them combined together give us a proper view of all the demands in Ireland. We have an urban centre in the south inner city here in Dublin. We have that rural area in Mayo. Galway give us that urban-rural mix, and then Cork City give us that smaller urban centre.
And when is it completed, the pilot project?
Well, we don't believe it will be completed. We believe this is going to be rolled out nationally. So what we're doing at the moment is we're evaluating and we're learning the lessons, and we have learned some very valuable lessons even in this short period. So we believe this is the model that will be rolled out into the future, and we're just looking at what are the learnings we've taken over the first couple of months, and the intention is that commencing around the end of this year, the model that's currently in place in those 4 divisions will be rolled out to the rest of the Garda divisions.
Do you think we're very late in the do you think we're very late in the day in coming to this in terms of insurance fraud?
Well, I spoke earlier on about the demand, and I spoke earlier on about the work that we do with the insurance companies. We have a protocol in place with them. We have a liaison officer in place with them. We have any investigation that we have reported to us, we're investigating it. So I'm not sure I would agree with the sentiment that we're coming to this too late or anything like that.
Yeah, and obviously the numbers are very small. Can I just suggest that insurance fraud be maybe put on the agenda for all the joint policing committees? There'll be new committees starting up now after the local authority elections, and I think it would be good just in terms of even raising awareness to people, in terms of encouraging people to report insurance fraud and letting people in communities know what the Gardaí are doing around it and what to expect if they report insurance fraud.
That's a suggestion.
Yes, suggestion.
Could I just ask, before you go, you might just let us have figures or information if there are figures or information available on fraud by banks. Like, we've come through a pretty turbulent time now with our banks and so on, and other financial institutions. You might let me know if there's any fraud reported in the context of the bank activity itself, or financial institutions, and if there's any cases ongoing. I'll let you respond to the committee because we're cut for time.
Okay.
Thank you both for coming along. It's been very informative, and thanks to the members for the cooperation.
Meeting at 10 o'clock.
Meeting 10 o'clock on Thursday morning.